Thank you for joining us at the Corporate Governance for Climate Resilience, Trends and Opportunities for Hong Kong webinar organized by Business Environment Council, or BEC. I'm Hilary, your host today and the representative from BEC's Policy and Research team. This webinar is supported by BEC's Climate Change Business Forum Advisory Group, which represents one of our core environmental focus areas on climate change. Before the start of the event, let us go over a few housekeeping. Today's webinar will be recorded, so please feel free to revisit the content after the recording is uploaded to BEC's website and our YouTube channel. All participants are muted by default, so if you have any questions or comments for our speakers, please use the Q&A or chat function at the bottom of your screen, and we will address them during the panel discussion. May I first invite Ms. Susanna Wong, Chair of Climate Change Business Forum Advisory Group, to give us her opening remarks. Susanna, please.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us at the webinar. BEC has organized many different seminars on climate change related topics, sharing best practice and new information on new regulations, technology, and approaches. This one is slightly different. You can say this is a slightly softer topic. Today, we'll focus on how companies can make ESG a sustaining topic in the management and drive the companies to build resilience against climate change risk from top down. Over the years, we experienced more extreme weather conditions, local and international policy and negotiations. Investors and community have changed the expectation on ESG. They expect companies to communicate various sustainability and financially material topics. In some occasions, companies are rewarded for their good work on ESG. Corporate governance on climate change resilience has transited from a nice-to-have topic to a very important topic in the boardroom. BEC has conducted works on the topic, aiming to understand the trends of corporate climate governance and risk assessment management practices along companies in Hong Kong. The Corporate Governance for Climate Resilience report will be released soon. The report will share with you on how companies can build resilience with more climate conscious governance, corporate governance strategy. Prior to the release of the report, I think it's great that we can have a discussion here on the topic in the next hour. So thank you.
Thank you, Susanna. To kickstart the webinar, please welcome Mr. Hendrik Rosenthal, Group Sustainability Director of CLP Holdings Limited, to share his insights on CLP's journey to corporate climate governance from a practitioner's point of view. Let us welcome Hendrik.
The crowd goes wild. Thank you. Thanks very much for having me here this morning to share some insights in terms of what CLP is doing on corporate governance, specifically on how we integrate climate change and climate risks and opportunities into our corporate governance framework. I'll just sort of try to walk you through as CLP being an example. And it's not saying this is sort of the best approach, but that's just what we've chosen at this point in terms of helping us to make sure that climate change remains remains on the agenda of the board. That's really what it comes down to at the end of the day, that the directors are informed, that they are aware of the issues, and that they can make decisions and recommendations to the management team accordingly. So where it all starts, it's quite simple, I suppose, and this is something that I think what every larger organization would have, is a vision, a mission, values and commitments we make to the community, to our shareholders, to our stakeholders, but also to our people and the organization as a whole, and the purpose that we represent in terms of what we deliver, what we produce, what we sell, and how we do that specifically. All that is underpinned by a long list of policies and codes, including a code of conduct. And if you were to look at these documents, and in particular the value framework, which you just updated actually at the end of last year, sustainability is really built into that. The underlying sort of meaning behind what a sustainable organization should be delivering is built into the values and commitments in particular. We had previously outlined a separate list of sustainability principles, whether that's related to employment, whether that's related to environmental performance, or any other sort of related issues. But we thought that's sort of, why is it standing alone? It shouldn't be a separate piece. Hence, we then went forward and built that into our updated value framework, and that's available for the public as well. And that's just sort of the basis of everything. But if you then go really into the corporate governance piece, that's really where the interesting considerations happen in relation to climate, as well as other ESG topics, other sustainability topics. And maybe I'll just try to outline by example of how our climate change decisions have been moving up and down this chain over the last few years. And you may recall that we have a climate vision. We call it the Climate Vision 2050. We published that for the first time back in 2007. We updated that over the years. We had set ourselves new targets in 2017, and then we published an updated Climate Vision 2050 document at the end of December 2019. So you might wonder, why did it take so long for us setting targets in 2017, which were in line with an approach that we felt comfortable in terms of how much we can decarbonize the electricity that we deliver to our customers. And why did it take so long for us then to actually move ahead and publish an updated climate vision? Well, there was really, and this is when it comes to the point of decision making, where we had a number of projects in our pipeline that were fundamentally perhaps not so much aligned with a climate vision. And it came to a point, and maybe just to be very specific. So we had a few projects in Vietnam back in, that was started well over a decade ago. And they were finally coming to a conclusion in terms of, let's go ahead and build these 2 new coal power plants in Vietnam. And here we are in the midst of, we just updated our climate targets. We updated our carbon intensity targets to be more stringent for the years 2020, 30, 40, and then 50. And it's about time we lay that out to our stakeholders, to our shareholders. This is our commitment that we make. And as literally, as I was writing this document with my colleagues, and we come to review all the markets, all the things we do in Hong Kong, or the things we do in Australia, in India, China, and then Southeast Asia is also one of our regions. It became very apparent that, oh yeah, and then we also going to build 2 more coal power plants with our updated new targets. It just didn't work. So the way that the group sustainability department then functioned is, it's our responsibility to write these documents, to make it prepared for publication. We talk to the functions, whether that's group environment, whether that's the company secretariat, whether that's the public affairs team, whether that's human resources, and really make sure that we have all the right information from them. But we also talk to the business units. What's your business plan for going forward for the next 10, 20, 30 years, literally, in terms of the type of assets we want to invest in, what we want to deliver. So that's sort of our grounding in terms of what's happening in the actual organization. But then we also report up. We report to Sustainability Executive Committee, and that's literally the C-suite of CLP Holdings. That's six C-suite we have, including our CEO and our CFO, which essentially means the group sustainability department has 6 bosses. So I have human resources. We have a chief human resources officer. We have our corporate development officer and anything related to public affairs. We have our chief operations officer. And that's really when it comes to nuts and bolts in terms of how do we actually make these different projects happen. But we also have our chief administrative officer, which is then very much related to the legal and the corporate governance side, but also increasingly so very much focused on climate change. And that's where that now sits within the organization. So we bring these topics forward, and we brought this issue forward that I mentioned with our climate vision, a 2050 update, and it was discussed and deliberated at the Sustainability Executive Committee. And we literally went to 2 or 3 sessions of presenting various drafts. How can we phrase this? How can we bring this to the market? The conclusion was we have to get out of these projects. We can't continue on these 2 projects. And this is really how it happened, in the sense that the senior management team deliberated this, and then we brought it up 1 more level to the Sustainability Committee. And again, I think that took at least 1 meeting, if not 2, if I recall. This was all back in 2019. To come to a conclusion, yes, the recommendation from the Sustainability Committee is indeed we should be coming out of these projects. It had to go to yet another, at that point, another committee which is not on this chart because it was very much related to our investments. That's our finance committee. What is the implication financially for us for actually coming out of these top projects? And then finally it was presented to the CLP board. These are the recommendations from this committee, and does the board support this going forward? So this is a very practical example of how a real material change, and then I guess the kicker was at that point, what we then put into the climate vision is not just saying we're not longer investing in these two coal power plants in Vietnam. The recommendation is we will not invest in any new coal power plants as part of our commitment to climate change. And that's really the fundamental first step, I think, in terms of doing the right thing as an organization. And it just basically, it takes discussions at the operational level, at the functional level, but it also takes discussion at the senior management team. They have to be comfortable in a forum where they can exchange information and exchange insights and exchange sort of a vision or a strategy that is open, and it's a forum for discussion. That's really, really important. It cannot just be at a committee that is chaired by the chairman and the chairman decides this is what we're going to do. What's the point of having committees, honestly? I think oftentimes this does indeed happen within organizations, but the way that we set this up here, the executive committee really allows for that discussion and for us to bring challenges to them. Anything goes. If we think it's a problem, whether that's related to labor standards or procurement or anything else, not just climate, obviously, we can bring this forward to the committee for deliberation so that decisions can be made in terms of how to bring that forward within the organization. So that's just an example in terms of how this happened for our latest climate vision that we published back at the end of December. And the good news is we just went through a whole nother cycle on reviewing our targets over the last half year or so, and reviewing our climate vision that we last published back in December of 2019. And we went through the same process again. We talked to the group functions, we talked to the business units. What are you planning to do across in terms of phasing out our coal plants? Are you changing that? Or can we accelerate the phasing out of our coal plants? And it comes to the point where sometimes you hear things, no, actually we were hoping to run it longer. And no, this is not going to happen. We have to, this is not part of our strategic vision under CLP. And so this is a really important process to go through as an organization, to communicate to the ground, to the people who make stuff, build stuff, sell stuff, that this is our vision and this is what we need to execute and implement. And then we went through the process of bringing that back to the Sustainability Executive Committee and literally to the Sustainability Committee just 2 weeks ago and to the board 2 days ago. Just approved on Monday a new set of climate targets, and we will bring those out in the next few weeks in terms of sharing exactly what that means. But it is an accelerated climate vision from what we have currently. And it went through a rigorous process, and it's all due to the governance that we have in place that allows us to have this deliberation and to make sure that the entire organization is on board when we make decisions along that line. So that's just an example. So maybe I'll just stop there. This is how climate governance has worked and is working within our organization. And yeah, maybe we just take it. Yeah.
Thank you, Hendrik, for sharing CLP's vision and climate actions. CLP has definitely exemplified how good corporate climate governance can help build a more sustainable future. Indeed, apart from the utility sector, other industries could also harness the opportunities brought by climate governance. Up next, Ms. Violet Law, the Policy and Research Officer from BEC, will share how Hong Kong businesses at large can interpret the key findings and policy implications from BEC's research report, Corporate Governance for Climate Resilience. Violet, please.
Thank you, Hilary. So good morning. Today, I'd like to share with you some findings and observations from BEC's research on corporate governance for climate resilience. So my presentation will start by explaining some of the background of this research. followed by our observations and recommendations for companies. And here we're particularly looking at listed companies who are most relevant on this topic. So the history, when we talk about the history of corporate governance, this term can be actually traced back to the early 1990s when we concern about how companies are directed and controlled. So at that time, good corporate governance was understood to improve decision makings, to meet compliance standard, to help companies to measure and monitor business operation, and also to manage investor expectations and relations. Well, up till now, we still use these as indicators of what a good corporate governance should look like. But until 2004, in fact, the term ESG was only introduced at that time through a UN report, which I show here on this slide, Who Cares Wins. At that time, people started to bring the three aspects of environment, social, and governance together. So as we redefine what corporate governance or ESG means to businesses over time, we see more attention now directed to integrate climate-related considerations in terms of building climate business resilience. So for example, we have physical climate risk that are caused by extreme weather conditions. I have some examples here on this slide, or transition risk caused by changing investor expectations, insurance requirements, etc. The subsequent disruption to operation, brand reputation, and market competitiveness are actually affecting businesses. So here, according to a report by the OECD published earlier this year, they define climate resilience as the capacity of human and natural system to learn, adapt, and transform in response to the risks that are induced or exacerbated by climate variability and change. So for our research, when we look at climate resilience, we also look at the interactions between the physical and transition risk, as well as the other factors, for example, governance and the environment. So in 2017, TCFD, the Taskforce for Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, published a recommendation on how climate-related disclosure can be used or reported under 4 thematic areas. So as we can see on this graph, out of these 4 aspects, we see that climate governance is actually the basis of the remaining 3. So good governance would actually enable companies to maintain strong oversight on climate-related matters within the company, to assist them to identify relevant risks and opportunities, to incorporate climate change in business strategy, and also to help them to set and review targets or metrics for assessment and reporting. So building on these concepts and understanding, our research would aim to study the trends of corporate governance in Hong Kong, and we're particularly looking at listed companies. We want to understand the role and behavior of company board and how they actually transition and change over time as we put more emphasis on climate change and climate resilience. Our research also aims to identify some enabling factors and provide suggestions for companies on good corporate climate governance. So our analysis is structured according to the Effective Climate Governance on Corporate Board Guidelines released by the World Economic Forum back in 2019. As you can see here, there are 8 principles. So it actually suggested the role of company boards in respect to governance, risk management, strategy, as well as reporting and disclosure. So starting on governance, oversight on climate-related issues at board is actually critical to demonstrate companies' commitment on climate change. This is an important first step to build resilience. Some typical signs that we observe as company boards are trying to demonstrate their oversight on climate-related risk includes reviewing the annual company sustainability report. They establish board statements and or policies related to climate change and sustainability. They also direct and review and oversee the setting and of the emission reduction targets. We also see some companies taking steps further who have started to incorporate climate-related risk and opportunities for company stewardship. And we are also expecting to see the incorporation of board directors' fiduciary duty related to climate as there is a recent review and consultation on the revision of the corporate governance code. So moving on. Apart from climate accountability, Another important element on good governance concerns the command and the proficiency of the subject matter of climate change. Observe that company boards in Hong Kong usually have dominated professions, for example, accountants, engineers, and lawyers. Some of these board directors have relevant experiences, for example, sitting in government advisory committees or sustainable development, or they might be serving as the board directors of environmental NGOs, well, that includes DC. Well, otherwise, it is also common to utilize the internal expertise, for example, the group sustainability department, or external expertise to inform the board on climate-related issues. One company actually shared with us that they have a sustainability advisory committee, which they invite external experts to be sitting in the committee and advise onto the board. And on top of that, we also see that companies are providing trainings and presentation regularly to board directors so that they can update the board on related development and changes of the subject matter. And in terms of the subject itself, climate change, there's a general observation that company boards have put more emphasis on mitigation than adaptation or resilience, or most of the time, actually, not even defining mitigation, adaptation, and resilience, but just looking at climate change in general. So when I was looking at the company policy strategies, we see that something wordings like emission reduction or energy efficiency is being more commonly seen as adaptation and resilience. So putting together the climate accountability and the subject matter together, I think company boards in Hong Kong are gradually building resilience on climate. We see that companies are starting to establish board-level sustainability committee to oversee these related matters. We also see executive committees at senior management level and also various working groups and task force at the operational level for execution and monitoring. This is gradually going mainstream as we see that there's a very clear flow of communication and well-defined roles and responsibility at different levels. And we have just listened to a very good example from Hendrik, so I'm not going to repeat that. Another aspect on governance structure actually concerned board culture. So the main objective of having a good board culture is to minimize any chances of groupthink, which is actually a phenomenon when single views are dominating the board discussion. So good governance structure, therefore, should try to introduce board diversity, and that includes in terms of gender, expertise, and profession. So one company actually shared with us a very interesting observation at their board discussion is that their board directors actually just bring up current affairs to the board discussion, and that includes topics such as climate change. So this is not a very common practice, but it's still is a nice example to see what would happen when the board is very proactive and when they have this kind of culture and how it drives the board communication and discussion. So moving on to risk management. So all companies that we have interviewed told us that they have performed some kind of climate risk assessment covering physical and or transition risk. So the role of company boards here is to ensure that the actions and the responses of climate is proportionate to the materiality assessments. So this may be reflected by strong coordination between board level sustainability and risk and audit committees. And board oversight here, according to the World Economic Forum guidelines, directs companies to conduct a company-wide risk assessment in short, medium, and long term. And outside of the board, this may be reflected as in the operation level, as we see more and more companies are now referencing to say the TCFD recommendation and perform relevant scenario analysis. One company shared with us that as they conducted their climate risk assessment, they have engaged their stakeholders throughout their process. They have then developed a specific climate adaptation and resilience plans towards the end. So this plan is developed through an interdisciplinary team with members from different business units, and it is a good example to see how these board directions or risk assessment findings can be translated to daily operations. And this is very important as we see it allows operational staff to relate more of their work towards climate change. And next, going on strategy. Listed companies in Hong Kong are gradually thinking long-term as they integrate climate-related consideration in their strategic assessment, for example, in their enterprise risk management and business continuity plans. So here we observe two interpretations that are more commonly used as we look at climate change as a risk. So the first one is to actually consider climate change as a standalone risk, and that's how we further break it down into physical and transition risk. The other approach, which is less common than the first one, is that to consider climate change actually as a contributing factor of other types of risk. So there's no right or wrong as to which approach is better, but we see that the first approach seems to be more mainstream because it aligns with more of the reporting frameworks that are currently in the market, and that includes the TCFD recommendations. And once these strategies are formulated, we see company boards started to implement and monitor their progress through incentivizing good climate-related performances. For example, setting them as their KPIs for senior management, or introducing them into the executive incentive schemes or remunerations of senior management staff. And lastly, on reporting and engagement, company boards are responsible to ensure the transparency of climate risk, opportunities, and strategies. And at management and operational level, we see that companies are complying to increasing number of reporting standards. Of course, that includes the TCFD framework. However, companies also told us that sometimes these framework is just look like another way to disclose their climate-related performance. So there's a trend leaning towards meeting the minimum requirements for disclosure and to actually fit the information that are already collected in multiple standards, then actually adjusting their mindset as to what we are after for each type of standard. And for example, in the case of TCFD, we are trying to focus more on governance and how governance will affect and interact with business strategy, risk management, and reporting. So my very last point on exchange and engagement, we have seen companies that show their commitment in maintaining regular exchanges and dialogues with industry peers, policymakers, investors, and other stakeholders of society. And I think that includes participating at BEC events. But looking internally, I think one company shared with us that their effort in engaging their employees on climate change and sustainability through campaigns and some mandatory trainings for all staff. And this is a very good example as to how we align the company direction throughout different levels of management and staff, and to help them to understand the subject matter, which will help to drive more positive behavioral changes. So based on these observations, we suggest that there is a need for more awareness raising exercises, especially on the concept of climate governance, how it is different from mitigation and adaptation. As to knowledge sharing networks, currently I'm aware of a group that is gathering the independent non-executive directors on climate change called the Chapter Zero, that was founded first by the University of Cambridge. It will be exciting to see if relevant chapters in Hong Kong will be established, and to see how these kind of exchanges will help board directors to bring more insight on climate into the discussion. And in terms of the board structure, we recommend companies to start setting up board level sustainability committee if they haven't considered that yet, to oversee company sustainability strategy and to make good use of the internal and external expertise that are already in place to make more informed decisions. And lastly, as to performing climate risk and opportunities assessment, we recommend continuous training for ESG and sustainability professionals on climate resilience and how it can be incorporated to the TCFD aligned framework. And to this point, we believe that a citywide climate resilience strategy from the government will be useful materials and information for companies to understand the relevant transition risks, which will assist them to perform scenario analysis. And lastly, for continuous improvement is to evaluate the board directors' performances and incorporate climate-related indicators as to into their duties, and also to review and update company policies regularly. So with that, I'd like to end my presentation here. This did not cover everything that we have in the research report, but I hope that we can provide some insight, particularly on the importance of and the evolving trend of corporate governance, as we can see that ESG are getting closer and closer related nowadays, than being very much a silo kind of analysis when the concept was very first introduced in the early 2000s. We also hope to help companies to understand more on how they can become more climate resilient. Thank you.
Thank you, Violet, for your clear and concise explanation on corporate governance for climate change. From governance, risk management, to strategy and disclosure aspects, I'm sure that our participants are enlightened and eager to discuss more on the subject matter. So without further ado, let us move on to the panel discussion. Again, if you have any questions for our speakers, please feel free to type your questions using the Q&A or chat function. Before we begin, may I please introduce our 5 panelists. They are Mr. Peter Tisman, Advocacy and Practice Development Director of the Hong Kong Institute of Certified Public Accountants. Mr. Mohan Dadwini, Deputy Chief Executive and Fellow of the Hong Kong Chartered Governance Institute. Ms. Susanna Wong, Chair of the Climate Change Business Forum Advisory Group. Mr. Hendrik Rosenthal, Group Sustainability Director of CLP Holdings Limited. And Ms. Violet Law, Policy and Research Officer of BEC. As for our moderator for today, that will be Mr. Simon Ng, Policy and Research Director of BEC. I'll now pass the time to Simon.
Thank you, Hilary. Good morning, everyone. It is my privilege to moderate this panel full of experts. And we've heard from Hendrik and also Violet. But I'm sure we'll hear from Susanna, from Mohan, and also from Peter later on. Now, I would like to start with, I think, something that, Violet, you mentioned in the recent public consultation paper on the revision of the corporate governance code. The Hong Kong Stock Exchange actually emphasized the need to strengthen corporate governance, corporate board, through corporate culture, director independence, board diversity, and engagement with stakeholders. Now, Hendrik, in your presentation, you talk about CLP having a very comprehensive structure, which is, I think, a very good starting point. Now, you have board directors who are very aware of climate change. You also have your group sustainability department, which is playing a very important role. Now, if you compare that, department versus introducing board diversity, do you think one is important than the other, or do you think actually both are complementary to one another? I mean, I know it's a difficult, question, but because for companies who are preparing to or trying to do the same, I think they might have the same question. Which one should I go first? Should I introduce, a diverse board first, or should I set up structurally, having a sustainability department first, or should we do it at the same time and then try to, make the best use of both?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is really, you can't have one without the other. You really need to focus on building your capacity within your organization. And that's, if it rests with the sustainability team, you need to make sure that you actually have experts on that team. It's not a corporate communications function. It's not a human resources function. These are sustainability professionals that should have worked in the industry for, I would say, at least 10 plus years in order to make a meaningful contribution. There's many programs out there nowadays, university programs that train sustainability professionals from the ground up. So I have a very strong view that this function has a responsibility to, and it's a function of almost like a jack of all trades. And it's not an easy undertaking by any means in terms of they need to know about climate change, they need to know about labor standards, they need to know about environmental standards, maybe even about building codes. They need to know about a lot of different things and need to be able to pick out the pertinent issues in terms of within each sort of area of expertise, where is the sustainability angle to that? And be able to aggregate that at a level that then that makes it accessible to the senior management team, that makes it accessible from a point of view of how do you make decisions around that? And these are business decisions. So it isn't accountants that we need. It isn't lawyers that are the expert. It isn't human resources professionals or communications professionals. They all have their area of expertise, and there's no way to go around that is necessary and required. But it is about being able to pick out within those different areas and across all of them, not just one of them. That's the thing. where the sustainability issues are, and then being able to bring that to the senior management team and to the board. So what is it that you tell the board? What is it that they are lacking, and where are the issues? There's, like was said, there's accountants on the boards, there's lawyers on the boards, there are professionals that have, they're well respected within their area of expertise in their field. But oftentimes, and especially currently, I think many of these usually elder individuals have not had a very basic training on sustainability, on climate change, on ESG. What does that actually mean in practice? And what does it mean for my business, more importantly? So both need to be really informed and educated. And I think when you look at it from a sustainability perspective, you need to be bringing people on board to understand this. And then from the board perspective, you need to provide a channel to actually, if you like, educate the board on this, because, it is a sort of newer issue, but it is very much pertinent from a risk management perspective. And it is, I think, about time that they take the responsibility to respond to that. And, if they make business decisions that are perhaps contrarian, like saying, I don't think climate change is real, or saying climate change is just political. And if that's what they have behind them, the board believes that, okay, at least they've been informed. You make your business decisions that are based on that, and you go ahead and do what you think is right from your perspective. But it is, I think, the responsibility to inform and make them aware that perhaps there is a lot of science behind climate change, and it is not a political matter.
Okay. Well, thank you, Hendrik. Since, Hendrik, you mentioned lawyers and accountants, so I think it's good now to bring in Peter. Peter, now, accountant has been the dominating profession in company boards for many years. What role or perspective do you think accountants can bring in to the board when tackling these, not just climate-related issues, but maybe in broader terms, sustainability issues? Now, Hendrik just mentioned it's not just about your professional knowledge, it's more about, an accountant or lawyers, their understanding of the sustainability issues. So what's your thought here?
Well, I'd say, first of all, I think this BEC report is very timely because climate resilience is definitely an emerging issue. And if you look at what's happening internationally, it's emerging very quickly. And I think we all need to up our game. I would say maybe I should take issue with what Hendrik said. It's not accountants we need. I would say it is accountants, because they bring their own skills to the board as executive directors and members of senior management. They've taken up leadership roles and support in relation to company systems and processes. They're also involved in stakeholder communications. They have good understanding of, as I say, process, data gathering, collection and analysis, and reporting, and that's equally relevant to ESG reporting as it is to financial reporting. They also have used to exercising their professional judgment, and professional skepticism, and they're generally bound by a code of ethics. So these help when you're looking at ESG data, you're looking at also the importance of completeness and accuracy, and these sort of skills and background that accountants have can be very useful in that context. And they can also, what they can do is communicate business value and insights to the board. And sometimes I think what you need to do is translate the sustainability information into the business case, because ultimately a business case has to be made, although I think we understand now, and business understands now, that there's a wider stakeholder interest as well, but the business case needs to be made, and there is a very strong business case now for good ESG. Accountants do have a good knowledge of corporate governance, of risk management and internal control. They're also knowledgeable about internal audit. I mean, this can ensure that issues are brought to the attention of the board, are discussed, that risks are identified, assessed and managed, that opportunities are identified and potentially capitalized on. So these skill set, I think, is very useful equally in the context of sustainability and ESG and climate issues, as it is in relation to financial issues and in relation to risk, of course.
Okay, thank you, Peter, for your sharing. Now, I'd like to bring Mohan into the conversation. Mohan, I know you've been doing a lot of research. With the Hong Kong Chartered Governance Institute, previously the HKICS, you've published a number of reports on board diversity. Do you think company boards in Hong Kong are doing enough, doing a good job? If not, then what would be your suggestion to them?
I mean, if you look objectively, and it depends on, whoever you're talking to or whatever report you're looking at, we are looking at 12 to 14% female diversity rates. Now, the thing is, diversity is not about just male or female or gender. It's about, a whole range of skills and expertise. But if you get something that's so fundamentally 50-50, so out of skewed, that, there must be something deep rooted with diversity as an issue. I was just telling Hendrik when we had a break that, if there is and we are on Olympic year, if there is actually an Olympic event for the race to the bottom, Hong Kong would get a medal. We would get a bronze medal. I think, I can't remember, is it South Korea or Japan will get the silver and gold, and we will be bronze, because it is that bad. Again, depending on, which report or which survey you do. So there is something wrong. And the stock exchange has put in a consultation paper wanting to improve that situation. And again, speaking for myself, not for the Institute, they are saying that, well, we want to eliminate single gender board. But that, again, is setting the floor pretty low. So if I actually have 3 female directors or women directors, I really could actually get rid of 2. And I shouldn't use those type of words, but that effectively is setting that floor that low. So we have, as an institute, written a pretty good research report to say that we really should be looking at target, not quotas, and maybe 30% over the next 6 years. The Equal Opportunities Commission, which I'm on, has also supported more diversity. So it is not a rosy picture. And is it because Hong Kong has a lot of family companies, or is it because they're state-owned? I don't think so. I think it's just that we haven't really got ourselves around this topic. So I mean, I hope that we are doing some work in moving the needle there. And internationally, you can't be an international financial center when you are pretty much at the race to the bottom. And Malaysia has 25%, Singapore has whatever percent. So I mean, take a look at our report and you can see how bad the situation really is in Hong Kong. But again, this is entirely all my own personal observations, not to be attributed to my institute.
Okay, thank you, Mohan. Now, if we may move on to the issue of corporate culture, and also I think Violet mentioned the phrase groupthink and how we can minimize that. Susanna, can I get your views about that? Because I mean, with your company, I mean, on the one hand, your directors, of course, are very aware of climate issues, but how would you minimize any chance of groupthink, especially if you don't have a very structured sustainability committee within your governance structure? How can you do that?
I think that's a very challenging thing to do. And honestly, I think especially when just after what Mohan saying, the one thing that is very, very good to help groupthink will be diversity. But I think he has already raised up that that's already a big challenge, and we are far from having diversity helping solve that challenge of groupthink. Some of the things we look at and do is to have different champion on topics. So the champions will bring in different kind of thinking or the backgrounds. And for some of the areas like sustainability, which many of the boards or many of the committees may not have good understanding and knowledge or expertise yet, we try to bring in experts in the form of sharing information, in the form of doing some training, having workshops, or just regularly making sure that we have those people coming in to talk about a topic. Sustainability is a topic that we try on that with that help, because that's an area that I don't think we are very knowledgeable about. We do not have yet the committee. And also that's an area that is very complex and it's changing all the time. So we are constantly bringing in expert on our front, sustainability expert, governance, to put them together to see how we can help the committee or the board to think a bit more.
Okay, thank you, Susanna. If I may ask Mohan and Peter as well the same question, how would you encourage, diversity of thoughts within the board? Do you have any ideas or suggestion based on your experience? Maybe I will start with Peter.
Well, I think, as Mohan said, there is an issue of diversity, and it's not just about gender. I think companies also do need to look at the background and experience, and particularly now when we're looking at ESG, you have to have people who are sensitive to these issues on board. But there is an issue, obviously, with sort of the male-female imbalance. I think other area that is being looked at by the exchange are things like genuine independence. You can avoid groupthink it helps if you have genuinely independent non-executive directors on the board. And so they made a recommendation about annually reviewing independent input into the board. I think that's pretty, we supported that. We also suggest that needs to be some disclosure around what you did in terms of your review of independence. So this is, and also the issue of long-serving directors. I mean, there are good long-serving directors, but you do need to have fresh minds on the board as well. So I think these are other ways in which you can help to bring a diverse and different views onto the board.
Okay, thank you, Peter. And Mohan?
It is challenging, whenever we have conversations, we look at, large listed issuers or better run one, they get it, they need to do something. But if you're looking at a smaller one or less well-run company, I mean, they're just ticking the box. And so really, that is the constant issue, tone on the top, ticking the box, tone on the top, ticking on the box. And lectures or series or conferences like this help raise awareness, but only to a certain sector. And so at the end of the day, it is very important for the regulators to come out and sort of give hints and give ideas. So a conference by the stock exchange is going to be much more powerful, than the BEC, right? So they should, the regulators should actually be more at the forefront promoting this particular topic, and this will be my call to them. But again, my personal view on this one is.
Okay, thank you, Mohan. Susanna, you mentioned experts, bringing in experts to help. Actually, that's a question for Hendrik. The question asks about, in your group, I suppose this gentleman is talking about your group sustainability department. So how many people do you have, and what kind of expertise do you have?
Right. Yeah, so we are a group of around 10 individuals with various areas of expertise, ranging from the sort of core reporting function, the disclosure function. So the experts that understand things like GRI, SASB, TCFD, the Hang Seng Index, the Dow Jones Sustainability Index, MSCI, FTSE, Bloomberg, the whole lot. I mean, there's so many of them, and they're all asking similar questions in a different way. So we need to have that core in terms of being able to respond to it, so that we then can also have the conversations with the investors. That's particularly important. We increasingly work hand in hand with the investor relations team. Just about every meeting we have nowadays with investors is related to ESG. So regularly I come in and support that conversation, but it also does require us to do a certain level of homework in that regard. And it also then is a function or an area of expertise of how do we actually move forward with disclosure to a level that is in line with perhaps similar to what the IFRS has in mind, what SASB has in mind, or what we think is actually the best way of telling the CLP story. So we work hand in hand with the public affairs team and our company secretariat to make sure that we are ticking all the regulatory boxes in the annual report, but also at the same time then have that integrated thinking brought forward of how sustainability is actually part and parcel of the organization, and how do we disclose on that annually. So that's an area of expertise. I think it covers a number of different professions. And again, that's the point I was trying to make earlier. That's the sustainability team has to be able to absorb what each of these professions is so good at, and not to undermine at all what these professions do, but it is about picking out some of that and bringing that together from a sustainability perspective. And then on top of that, we have a whole, what I call for the time being, sort of the analytics function. And that's really about data management as a sort of a fundamental piece of that. So all our ESG data We have about 80 KPIs assured on an annual basis by a third party. That is an onerous process on its own. And that requires reaching out across the organization as well to make sure that the data comes in a format that is really acceptable to the auditor. But then we have in total about 550 KPIs we actually disclose annually. So that also needs to be managed on top. And so there's also data manuals that need to be built, a whole process, and actually digitalizing that. That's the current project. So we do need some level of IT, for example, in terms of what sort of programs and software is available and how do we make that happen. But what's even more sort of strategic at that point is that's under part and parcel of that same function is understanding the forward-looking piece, and that's related to our decarbonization trajectory, our strategic planning. How do we integrate all these business plans we have across the group into a climate vision, for instance? So we calculate our decarbonization trajectory for the group. And then on top of that, and this is really the more sort of challenging area, and that what everyone's talking about now is the scenario analysis piece, in particular the climate scenario analysis piece. So that's also a part of that function. Then we need people that know something about procurement, because we have to manage our supply chain. We have to have sustainability within procurement, within the procurement function. And then we need to understand the carbon markets. So we have to have some expertise in that. We have expertise in China for the ETS, yes, but what does that mean to the group? We generate carbon credits in India. We have to be able to communicate that back to the senior management. And then we have a whole other set of experts on communication. We do have that as well, sustainability communication, to bring out documents that we can publish and that feel comfortable with and that tell a coherent story. So that's a very specialized area. You have to be able to write, at a very high level. That's not easy. Not everyone is able to do that. And then we have sponsorships. We have different areas in terms of how do we bring out the message. We have a whole channel, what we call now in Affinity, where we publish articles on a regular basis about some of the things that we do and what the trends are in the industry. And that's probably 10 people not enough for the job, to be honest.
Well, that's quite obvious. Well, thank you, Hendrik. Now, we're running out of time, but I want to save the last question. I think it's important. It's about training. I want to hear from Peter, maybe also Susanna. We only have 3 minutes, so maybe 1 minute for each of you. Just say a few words about training, how important that is. What kind of training do you think is most important? Peter.
Well, I think we definitely have to have a multifaceted approach, because this is an emerging area, as I said, and nobody has a sort of monopoly on knowledge. From a professional body's point of view, and we have a sustainability committee, which Hendrik will be aware of, and they're trying to raise awareness, having discussions with corporates. And recently had a webinar involving the CEO of the SFC, and Teresa Coe, who is the vice chair of IFRS Foundation, talking about the potential setting up of an international sustainability standards board. We run articles in our magazine. Your director of sustainability and ESG advisory was interviewed in the BEC's director last December. We run other types of events. We also have an awards program. Awards corporate governance. We introduced the ESG awards in 2011. We're now expanding that too. We've revamped it. They are now called corporate governance and ESG awards. And we're reviewing the marking scheme. We're bringing in aspects of climate change and whether companies have really assessed the impact that may have on the business. So that's another way of raising awareness. So there's a multiplicity in terms of ways that we can do it, but also other parties need to be involved as well.
Okay. Thank you, Peter. Mohan?
We're not as large as HAICPA, so we're little boys in the training front, okay? But we do have around 17,000 people that go through our training every year. And we plan strategically different areas of governance. And we listen to important stakeholders like Hendrik, and we listen to people and we sort of shape enforcement, blue governance, blue blood governance, and then we look at climate, we look at ESG, etc. So we try to bring in people who really know this for relevance. So January, I'm putting in a conference. I would have Christine Law, Amar Gill from BlackRock, David Simmons from, and maybe yourself, You're actually on the invite list, okay? You haven't heard yet, okay? But, so we try to bring in different people, different trainings, and, it is extremely important because at the end of the day, we do that. And the next thing is we want practical training.
Yeah.
We want to tell people, how do you, do this or not do this and what you should be thinking. So it's not just, up in the air, high level, you sort of have to translate, and that's the hallmark of our training. So we try our best doing that.
Okay, thank you. Good to hear. Susanna.
To me, it's more what kind of training companies need.
Yeah.
So they're nice to be able to offer a lot of trainings to companies. I think most of the companies need a few different types of training. First thing is, I agree with Peter that all the sustainability training has linked back to some business cases or how it translates into what we're very used to, the P&L, the balance sheet, the thing, to make sure that we understand we want to be good corporate citizens, but at the same time, what does it mean to the business? For main body of the companies, I think first thing is they need to understand a bit more about what sustainability means. It doesn't mean energy saving only. It doesn't mean reducing wastage only. From that, making sustainability a word that's understandable, not very far from, it's not like business, and get them a bit more on technical training. Practical things are very important, because if you want them to just write it down and forget about it, they won't even want to attend. So I think mixing the different things for the senior management of making business, more business and numbers related, governance or regulatory even, for the main body, something that I can help on and something I understand. That will be most of the companies. I think that's something most of the companies will need it.
Okay, thank you, Susanna. Now I've been keeping Violet very quiet. Just one last word. When will the report be ready?
I'm trying to finalize the report right now, so we're expecting this to happen in the next couple of weeks.
Okay, thank you. Because we've been receiving a lot of comments about the report, including comments from some of our panelists here. So we're trying to incorporate all their suggestions, try to make the report as best as it can be. So with that, I think I have to close because of time. Thank you so much, everyone. Really enjoy your sharing, and please give up to all our speakers and panelists. I'll hand it back to Hilary to close. Thank you, Hilary.
Thank you, Simon, and our panelists for moderating the discussion. This concludes today's webinar. An event feedback questionnaire will be sent out to all participants after the webinar. Please take a few moments to fill in the form. Once again, thank you for joining us, and together we can work towards a more climate resilient business environment. Thank you.